Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Well, over the last couple of weeks, there's been an increased worry, especially amongst the prepper group, of, well, what are we going to do if we have more of these volcanoes? You know, you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the Tonga volcano. One of the biggest volcanic eruptions in modern history, they say at least in the last 30 years. It's very close in comparison to some massive earthquakes, or excuse me, volcanoes that erupted. One back in 91 in the Philippines that caused the earth to cool a little bit, but then also going all the way back into the early 1800s, which caused the year without a winter. And so there's been an increased concern with that, because also over the past year or so, the volcanic and earthquake activity has increased on the planet. And we're not going to go into necessarily the science behind that and why it's happening and what's going on. Today we're just talking about survival tips. We're talking about what to do to survive against this kind of stuff. And it's going to be kind of all over the board, because we're focusing on volcanic eruptions, and there's kind of two things. There's number one, if the initial blast, if you're in the direct path of that, of what to do. And then the second thing is if this one that went off in Tonga, and especially if we have any others of nearly or more of that magnitude, of what it means for us as a planet to survive a very possible year without summer. And so let's cover some things. First off, I want to talk about if you're in the direct path of a volcanic eruption enough so that it's going to, you're going to have that initial fallout and stuff. I know a lot of people, it's on their mind of Yellowstone, and I will touch on that. And when I talk about initial path, I'm not talking about, you're in the initial path of like lava flows and stuff like that. That's pretty obvious. You got to get out. This is one of those cases, it's a bug out scenario. There's not too many people in America other than Yellowstone, so let's just put that one on the shelf right now, that's going to be in the direct path of lava flows from a volcanic eruption. There's a few, but not a lot of the population is in jeopardy of that. So we're not going to talk about that. We're mostly going to focus on fallout, ash. If you're in the direct path, or if you're maybe not direct path, but if you're in an area that you could have that ash fallout, survival and emergency tips are pretty much simple. You want to, number one, you want to be able to keep that ash from you. That's imperative, because if any of you are familiar, especially you gardeners and stuff, familiar with diatomaceous earth, that powdery substance that you put on your yard or on your plants to kind of kill the bugs. When you feel it, it feels like talcum powder. But as you know, under a microscope, it's like little tiny razors, and that's what kills the bugs. Volcanic ash is the same way. When you breathe it in, it's feel fairly powdery, but when you breathe that in, it's just going to lacerate the inside of your lungs. So if you feel, and if I would include the Yellowstone in this one, that you are in the path of something like that happening, where you could experience ash fallout from a volcanic eruption, you should have kind of a little box. And in that box, you're going to want trash bags. You're going to want just plastic sheeting. And what you're going to do with this is you're going to cover windows, tape, several types of tape. Duct tape works really well. But having like a tub where you would keep this kind of stuff, so that you can tape up your windows, tape up any exhaust vents or anything, intake vents for your heating and air systems of your home, and be able to stay inside for a while. Okay, now the ash fallout isn't going to last for days and days and weeks and weeks. It may last a few hours, it may last a couple of days, and once it's on the ground, the danger of breathing that in, as long as you're not out there stirring it up, is over. So this is an initial thing. Also to worry about is your water. You want to make sure your water is either secure or that you have drinkable water to survive through that initial thing. Because if this gets into water, it's not good. You're not going to want to drink it. So having a water source. Now, if your water source comes from a municipal, if I can spit that word out, municipal water source, that's not necessarily good, because a lot of municipal water sources, at some point in their travel before it gets to your sink, they are surface water. Maybe it comes from a lake, maybe it goes through some type of treatment, and so the water itself is exposed. And if that's the case, which is a lot of cases in municipal water, it's going to pick up ash, and it's probably not going to work. Because what happens is that water goes through filters, and as it picks up that ash, it clogs up the filters and it just shuts the system down. Now, if you have a deep well, you're going to be okay, but depending on the scenario, you could lose electricity also. So having a water source is very important, especially being able to clean it. And if you say, well, I've got like a Berkey, or I've got, some type of Sawyer Mini or something, those things are not going to work, because they're going to clog up extremely fast. It's just, they're not going to be able to handle the load of the ash fallout. So this is some real basics of the initial. I know a lot of people talk about Yellowstone, and they worry about Yellowstone. I'm not going to get into whether it is or isn't, close to happening, because it's just all over the board of whether, we're getting close to that point, or we're thousands of years away, or anything like that. And then there's also this debate of, is it survivable at all in the continental U.S.? From my research, I'd say yes, it is, depending on where you're at. It looks like, obviously, if you're in the, anywhere near Wyoming, you're probably not going to have a good day if that happens. But the further out you go, it's less ash. And so there's some tips that I could give you for that, or if you're just near another volcano, because there are some volcanic activity and some volcanoes in the continental U.S. for most of my viewers. One of the things that you can do is just protect from the ash fallout, not just that initial, protecting your body and that kind of stuff, but also protecting the soil. Something that you can do, and again, we have to understand that a lot of this information is speculative, because we really haven't gone through a Yellowstone eruption, but we have seen other eruptions around the planet, and so we kind of use that to kind of gauge of whether or not it's survivable and what to do. From my understanding, as far as like growing vegetables, your soil, of being able to survive after that, of growing your own food, the worst thing is the ash on the soil. And from what I have read, and I could be wrong on this, but this is through my study in this, that as long as the ash does not touch the soil, you're okay. So if you have something that covers the ground, that is keeps it from touching the soil, then you're okay. And so one of the plans that we have, that's something to think of, is getting tarps to cover the soil. And I think a good option are those billboard sign wraps. You can pick those up pretty cheap, used ones. They come in all kinds of sizes and stuff. And if you get a billboard wrap and you have them figure out how much you need, you're going to have some time, unless if you're close enough that you don't have time to go out and put them over your garden, then you're probably going to be dead anyways. But let's say where I'm at, I'm not close enough that the initial blast will probably kill me. And I know that's debatable, but if I hear that it goes off, basically one of the very first things that we're going to do is we're going to take these billboard wraps, and we go out and we cover ground areas, gardens and stuff. Now, of course, if you're in the middle of a growing season, that's going to create, what do? Do you go in and harvest what you can and mow it down and cover it up? Do you cover up a different spot? That's going to have to be something you decide. But you put that down, and there's a possibility that it will protect a good amount of that space from the ash. Of course, you're going to have to, depending on the depth of it, if it's just an inch or two, that's not going to be that big of a deal. You know, if you're dealing with 6 inches, 10 inches of ash falling, that's certainly going to be problematic of what to do with that ash to get it off of that tarp, to open it up so that you can have a clear space to grow. I understand the leaching of the ash into the surrounding ground. I get that, but from what I have read, it's not as bad as you would think. It's mostly that direct contact is the biggest thing to kind of prevent. So that is a potential solution. I get it. It's not 100% this is going to work, but it's better than doing nothing. And there is evidence that if you do this, especially over a large enough space, that you can create at least enough growing space to plant gardens. And so that's a solution there. Of course, you're going to have to worry about your animals breathing in ash. If you're able to put them inside in a barn, that would certainly be beneficial to them. This ash will clog up all kinds of stuff, vehicle intakes, all that kind of stuff. So if you can prevent yourself from like running a vehicle, having it turned on, because it's going to be sucking that in, tractors, any kind of engines, and it'll completely ruin them. All right, so now let's move on to, you're not in the direct path of this stuff. So this Hunga Tonga's gone off. There's a potential that the earth could cool already. We're already in that threat. I understand it's debatable. There are people saying that we could see a 0.5 degree to 1 degree Celsius reduction of temperature on the planet already because of it. There's others saying that it wasn't quite enough. But then there's also this potential of another one. The Ring of Fire has become pretty active. There's some activity up in Alaska over the last few days, a once thought extinct volcano. There's been several swarms of earthquakes around that volcano, and now they have listed it as reactive and under a yellow alert or whatever. And it is a similar volcano to Tonga, where it's just below the surface of the sea. Anyway, so there's definitely been there's also been a lot of activity down in the Tonga Islands, right around where that volcano went off, and a few others. So there's been a lot of activity. So let's go under the scenario that we're going to deal with, maybe a year or 2 or 3 with reduced temperatures. And if you add that to already grand solar minimum, I mean, I saw today that there's a rare snowstorm that happened in Jerusalem, Israel. Iraq has been dealing with bitterly cold temperatures. Iran, a lot of places in the Middle East, places I saw, I think it was New Zealand. I mean, they're in summer down there. They're in their warm weather, and they had a snowfall. There's been just unusually cold temperatures even here in the United States. I saw Virginia had recorded the lowest temperature on record, I believe, in Virginia. So we're already dealing with a grand solar minimum, and this volcanic eruption could definitely play into that. And if we had any more, it was most certainly do. So what is your greatest threat for those? Because we're not in the direct path. We don't have to worry about ash falling on us or lava flows or anything from most of the Ring of Fire volcanoes. Our main concern is the reduction of temperature is going to play havoc on growing. Food reduction all over the planet, potential crop failures, things like that. So what can you do to kind of prevent that in your own way, or try to create kind of an insurance policy for yourself? It's going to be food production. That's going to be your main thing, food production. You can, number one, and I've mentioned this before, check your seeds. Let's say whatever growing zone that you're at, let's say you're in a growing zone of 7, and that's pretty much, you grow the plants that would grow in a 7. You need to kind of look at what would grow in a lower growing zone or colder region. And some of the seeds that you have would probably work, but maybe not all that you have. And so you need to have garden seeds that would work in a colder region. And basically you're going to look at your root crops, and then a lot of your brassicas. Those do much better in a colder growing season. Carrots, turnips, radishes, potatoes, kale, broccoli, Things like that are going to do much better in a colder region. You need something that's able to handle the cold and that grows in a shorter growing season. So definitely check your seeds and make sure that you have seeds that will grow in areas like that. So, for instance, I'm here in southern Missouri, and I might look at what grows really well in northern Iowa or Minnesota. You know, what do people grow in their gardens in Minnesota? And that might be something that I would put down as a plan to grow if things start to drastically change. So have that backup already. And then another thing, and this is a big one, is greenhouses. Greenhouses, hoop house, some type of structure to keep the ground and the plants warm so that they can grow to counteract the fact that it's a little cooler. This isn't just as simple as just erecting a greenhouse, because here's a couple of things. Number one, if we're in a scenario where there's massive food shortages and famines and stuff, so you're really living out of your garden, these little greenhouses that you pick up at like Harbor Freight and stuff that are like 10 foot by 10 foot or 10 by 12 or something like that, those are basically to get your plants started, grow some flowers, and you're not going to be able to grow enough food in that to survive. You need something more like the big high tunnels, these things that are like 20 by 80 foot or 60 by 100 foot, things like that. Those are much more expensive. They are a big investment to make. Or you could build your own greenhouse. I've seen a lot of people build them out of old house windows and stuff like that, and that works well also. But you're going to need the space. They need to be pretty good size, because in this scenario, you're going to be living out of that garden very possibly. And so you need something big. Now, there's another thing that a lot of people don't think about with greenhouses. If you're growing all of your food in a greenhouse, you need lots of this. Okay? So for instance, here, when I grow a garden and it's outside, the first half at least of that garden's life is being watered by rain. I'm not watering it. I usually don't start watering our garden until, later on in the summer. But the first month or so, 4 to 6 weeks at least, I hardly have to put anything on it. The rain just, it waters it. Rainfall takes care of it. If you're growing in a greenhouse, hoop house, something like that, high tunnel, you don't get that. You need to be able to water it pretty much all the time. And so you're going to have to think of that. If you're in a scenario where there's some type of apocalyptic thing that's happened, you may not have as much water source as you're used to. You may not have, the grid could be down, and so you're not able to run your well like you've planned on before. Or maybe if you're connected to a county or a municipal water source, it's not working. So this is what I tell people. Greenhouses, high tunnels, things like that, they're great, but with an SHTF, you may not have the water that you're normally used to, and you have to have water, some way to pump it in, spray it, to irrigate it somehow, because that, under that cover, it's not getting rainwater. And a lot of people don't really think of that or mention that. So certainly be thinking about that. You're also going to need to have some type of root cellar or a way to preserve those roots. Most of these root vegetables will last the winter if they're properly stored. Obviously, a root cellar is a good one, but you can put them under your house. If you have a crawl space under your house, you can put them in boxes with some straw in there. Try to keep them where they're not touching, and it'll work the same way. A cold, dark, damp place, you don't want to get them wet. You want to keep them where they're not touching very much. And it'll last also. So these are some tips. I understand I've not covered everything, but I'm mostly focused on food, which is really, really important with all these this increased earthquake activity and increased volcanic activity over the last year. These are some things that we could deal with. Now, as far as the Yellowstone, if you're far enough away from it, you're going to deal with some ash, and it's very possible that you'll survive it. I know it's debatable. A lot of people say everyone on the United States continent is going to die, North American continent's going to die. It doesn't really look like that if you crunch the data and stuff. But certainly if you're within a few hundred miles of it, you're going to have a really, really bad day. The further you go out, the much less ash. A lot of it depends on the winds at that time, what the weather's doing, which way it falls. So it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't mean that you're not going to survive it. You just have to have the proper preparations for it. All right, folks. Thank you all for watching. Catch you in the next video.